Welcome back. In this particular video, we're going to go over some real basic background on what is management, some definitional perspectives. And as I'm launching into this, as I was thinking about this, those of us that are faculty are probably doing some sort of research, right? Especially since I'm teaching you management. My area of expertise is entrepreneurship, which falls under the broader category of management. And those of us that are doing research, for the most part, are members of a large research organization called the Academy of Management. It has a conference, and then it's also an organization. It has publication outlets, journals where you can put your research in. And I was looking on the website, counting them. There are 26 different research groups in the area of management. 26 different ones. That means that you have dozens, if not hundreds, of faculty members dedicated to each one of these areas. Now when you start thinking about it, you're looking at people with at least 10, sometimes 20 or 30 years of training in each one of these disciplines. So there is so much to do and talk about in management that it's not possible to do it in one class, and it's not possible to do it in, quite frankly, even a lifetime. But what we're going to try to do in this course is teach you enough of the basics so that when you have new issues or new problems, you're going to know where to look it up. But let me just tell you about the diversity of these 26 domains, because I think it'll illustrate a point here. The largest group in the Academy of Management is my own division, the Entrepreneurship Division, which is more than 1,000 faculty members. And we look at entrepreneurship normally as, there's a million definitions of entrepreneurship. There's no universally agreed upon definition, and we'll talk about that in a couple lectures. But entrepreneurship normally has something to do with forming a new business or a new organization. And there's usually some sort of a relationship to an opportunity and the creation of that organization, right? There's also strategy, which we'll talk about in this course as well. And strategy is generally seen as techniques used to pursue competitive advantage. A little different than entrepreneurship. There's critical management, which borrows a lot from humanities perspectives to better inform managers and to create kind of a kinder, more humane world. There's technology and innovation management, which explores the relationship between managers and workers in different forms of technology and digitization. There's organization behavior, which is the psychology of organizations, and there's operations management, which is manufacturing design and processes. So the areas of management that I'm going to talk about in this particular class are the ones that I have direct experience with, those are the ones that I've prioritized, or the ones that I've done research on. So you're going to get areas where I can give you the most kind of realistic, direct feedback. That way when you go out into the world, you at least have a few things that you know pretty well. So we've talked about the research perspective in management. But you're probably thinking, well, I'm not going to be a professor and I'm not going to be a researcher. Why do I care about those 26 perspectives? Valid point. So for this particular reason, we're going to talk a little bit about a practice perspective. What is management from the practical side? And I think the best definition of management comes from Thomas Edison. He said, there is a better way. Find it. That is the crux of management. Figuring out how to do things better. Now we'll talk a little bit more about what better means in this particular video, but finding a better way to do things. Another definition could be that management is something like the art and or science of planning and organizing the basic elements of people, machines, and materials and money, and giving those basic elements some sort of direction, coordination, and activity structure that in some way furthers the organization goal. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Well, let me give a few other understandings of management, at least from a historical perspective, and that might illuminate just a little bit more. And we could do a whole seminar on Frederick Winslow Taylor, but we're just going to give the basics for this particular video. Frederick Winslow Taylor is known as the father of scientific management. Some people call him the father of modern management, although some people would disagree with that. But Taylor was an engineer, a mechanical engineer specifically, and he is credited with being the gentleman who popularized assembly and manufacturing lines. And what he was obsessed with was time motion studies. He believed that the role of a manager was to optimize processes. Okay? Now, his words are that management is the art of knowing exactly what you want from your employees and seeing that they do that in the best and cheapest way. He always said that when you deal with workers, you should always seek harmony instead of discord, cooperation instead of individualism, maximum output instead of restricted output, and the development of each person to their greatest efficiency and prosperity. So let me tell you a little bit about the work that Taylor did. He wrote 2 books that are quite popular, The Principles of Scientific Management and Principles of Shop Management. Now, you can go on Project Gutenberg, which is gutenberg.org, and you can actually find his books for free in the public domain if you wish to read them. They're not terribly difficult reads. So Taylor's a mechanical engineer, had focused on something that he thought was really weird. He studied machine shops in the beginning, and he noticed that workers in machine shops, when they're using a lathe or they're maybe loading coal into a train car, or maybe if they're hauling something called pig iron. Pig iron is an unrefined form of iron that you eventually smelt down into steel, so just these big iron rods, and they load them into trains and things like that. He noticed that when that kind of stuff was going on, that workers did things in all sorts of different ways. They worked by what he calls the rule of thumb. Okay? They did things based on their convenience and the way that they thought was best. And Taylor thought that his role as a manager was basically to take a stopwatch and observe different kinds of workers operating in different ways and kind of pick from the best practices of the different workers so that these practices could be shared across the organization and everybody would perform in the task in the exact same way, and it was going to be the most efficient way. So let me give an example. One of his studies is he looked at workers that were shoveling coal and dumping it into train cars. What he noticed is that they were doing it at all sorts of different rates and it wasn't very efficient. Through a lot of studies and for timing people, he eventually decided that a shovel of a certain size was optimal for the workers, and they were to shovel kind of a uniform weight of coal each time, and he even dictated when they would take breaks. If they weren't tired, it didn't matter. They still took a break to recover so that they'd be at their optimal efficiency when they got back to work. And if they started slacking off, they didn't get to take a break until his time prescribed break. Now you're probably thinking, wow, he's kind of like a tyrant. Well, that's one of the biggest critiques of Taylor, right? He believed that the manager knew best because the manager was educated, whereas the workers were not. Again, you have to remember he's writing in 1911. Things are very, very different nowadays. But he saw the role of the manager as some sort of a task designer. Now, his particular techniques were, in some ways, they've been called dehumanizing, okay. But what did happen that was interesting is that worker output sometimes would go up by 2.5 times. So you think about someone shoveling coal and dumping it into a train car. They were shoveling 2.5 times more coal into the train car. So each worker was more efficient. And Taylor strongly believed that if workers perform to the standards set forth, then they should also have some degree of profit sharing. So sometimes he'd pay anywhere from 30 to 65, 70% extra to the worker for performing in the way that they dictate. So there was a little bit of profit sharing going on. So that's Taylor, right? And these ideas inspired Henry Ford, Ford cars, and were more or less the model for his manufacturing processes. Taylor's ideas, although he did not come up with the assembly line, he's the person that kind of popularized it through his books. His manufacturing methodologies were the basis for the manufacturing culture in Japan, as well as the Soviet Union, and even he tried to implement some of these things in Europe, although it didn't work as well in Europe as it did in the US, Japan, and the Soviet Union. So, again, that's his definition of a manager, right? Really focusing on designing tasks, directing workers, and making sure these things get executed. Now, there was somebody who is seen in many ways as the opposite of Taylor. And she's my personal favorite in terms of management writer. It's Mary Parker Follett. She was one of these people that was brilliant and excelled in multiple management and other kinds of domains. So she was a social worker, a management theorist, an org theorist, a sociologist, a political scientist. I mean, she really excelled in many, many areas. And she is known by some people as the mother of modern management. And she defines management as the art of getting things done through people. She believed that if you followed her techniques, that employees would be more engaged, more productive, and happier, because she believed in giving them autonomy within their roles. And especially if you treat workers like adults or intelligent individuals, they'll learn how to work cooperatively. So whereas Taylor assumed that the manager knew everything and was the boss and could select, Mary Parker Follett said that the best way to manage somebody is not to actually manage them at all. It's rather to understand the needs of a particular situation or a task and help people understand how they can contribute to that particular task for their own ways and their own reasons. So as where Taylor does a lot of telling of a story, and he does listen, don't get me wrong, but he does more telling of a story and less listening, Mary Parker Follett really emphasized listening to people first, trying to understand where they're coming from, relating it to the task at hand, and then telling that story back to them in a way that made sense for them. Her ideas were also built upon by the famous management theorist Chester Barnard, who wrote this book called Functions of the Executive. And he says, of course, he builds on her ideas. Some might say he appropriated them, but that's another story. But Mary Parker Follett really believed in listening to workers. And that's a big thing. And her main concepts that she talks about in management, she says there's 3 management techniques that exist. You've got coercion. Now, coercion means that I'm the boss, I have power over you, okay? And I can make you do something. If you don't listen to me, you're going to get fired. If you don't listen to me, I'm going to take your pay. That's coercion, almost an implied threat, okay? She compares coercion to compromise. Now, you hear compromise all the time. Compromise, and Follett is right in this, I believe, compromise involves basically both sides giving up something that they actually want in order to achieve some sort of a solution. And she doesn't like compromise either, because it implies what we call desire suppression. In other words, because I've had to give up something in order to move forward, I'm kind of resentful. Yes, I get a little bit of what I want, and the other party gets a little bit of what they want, but we both had to give up something, and that can lead to kind of anger festering and boiling underneath the surface. So she's against compromise as well. But integration, on the other hand, implies that neither party threatens each other, and neither party gives up something, but rather they find solutions that are better for everyone. Okay? And you're probably wondering, what's a good example of integration? Well, the thing I love about Mary Parker Follett is that she tells her management theories in terms of like very simple conversations that you'd have over coffee. And there's one story in particular that sticks out in my mind of integration in action. So she describes a married couple that are arguing, okay? And the married couple, the crux of the argument was that the wife wanted to go to Europe and the husband didn't want to pay for it. Now remember, Mary Parker Follett is writing in the 1920s and 30s, so travel to Europe was a lot more expensive than it is now. So the couple was fine. The wife wanted to go to Europe, the husband didn't want to pay for it. So coercion would be something like the husband says, you don't have any money, therefore you're going to stay here, and then the wife loses out on everything. It's coercion. Or the wife could say, I'm going to take your money whether you want it or not, I'm going to go to Europe whether you like it or not. That's also coercion. There can also be something like compromise, and that could be something like, well, how about instead of going to Europe, we go to Canada? But neither of them actually wants to go to Canada. He doesn't want to pay for a trip to Canada either. She doesn't want to go to Canada to begin with. So if she doesn't get what she wants, he doesn't either, but it's just a solution and we move on. But that's not what happened with this particular couple. The husband and wife instead were sensible. They sat down and they explored what each person actually wanted. And the wife explained that it wasn't necessarily that she had to go to Europe, it's that she wanted to help. She'd read somewhere in a book that people in Europe were impoverished and hungry, and she wanted to help people. Okay? So when the husband's new solution, based on her suggestions, was that, well, actually, if you went to Cleveland, there were many more people in Cleveland that were needy and hungry, and he could go with her and help as well, because it was something that was meaningful to him too, also helping people. He just wanted to help people closer to home. She wanted to help people, period, and he was spending less money for the both of them to go to Cleveland, and they were able to go repeatedly. So they both got what they actually wanted, not what they thought they wanted. She thought she wanted to go to Europe, but what it really was is she wanted to help people. So they created a solution together, the husband and wife together equally, that would help satisfy both of their needs. So in this particular case, we see that management is about listening to the needs of people and finding creative ways to achieve your true desire, not the one that you think you want. Again, I love her work. Now, if you're interested, you can shoot me an email or post a comment, and I can get you hooked up with some of her works because they're also available for free in the public domain. So this is Follett's perspective. Now, another perspective that's commonly used is one built on Henri Fayol's work. He was another management theorist that wrote after Follett, and he calls it the POLC framework. P is in Papa, O is in Oscar, L is in Lima, C is in Charlie. And that stands for planning, organizing, leading, and control. I'll talk more about that in this particular class in some later videos, but that's another understanding of leaders. You are planning, or excuse me, leaders or managers, you are planning, you are organizing, then you lead, and then you control. Okay? So, what I want you to take out of this, we start moving here, is that so much of management involves both hard skills and soft skills. You've got to know the technical piece, right? You've got to know the tools and the actual tricks of management. And don't worry, I'm going to teach you some of these, and more importantly, from my own experience, I'm going to explain why some of these things don't work as well as we might think they are, and I'll show you how I've gotten around it in my consulting, my managerial experience. I can teach you the technical side and the hard side. The art of management is a little bit more difficult. That's your people skills, that's your empathy. That's something that comes normally with experience over time. I can give you examples to help you develop your own style, which is what we're going to do later on in these different managerial styles. But that's something that you kind of have to develop through experience. Okay. So the last thing that I want to talk to you about is theory X and theory Y, which again is that hard skills versus soft skills. Now this was proposed by McGregor in the 1960s. And I'm going to tell you the theory, and then I'm going to tell you why I hate it. But it still serves a purpose. McGregor said that under theory X, you could say that managers need to understand that workers are inherently lazy and they're not very bright. So the best way to deal with a worker is to micromanage that worker. That's how you get the most out of them. That's theory X. And again, it screams Frederick Taylor. Okay. Theory Y says that workers are normally inherently good, they're independent, they can be motivated, and the best way to bring maximum effort out of workers is to let them kind of be independent, almost be like artists. That's kind of like Mary Parker Follett, but not exactly. Okay? Well, in my own research, and my own experience as well, I might add, I would say that theory X and theory Y are kind of both right, but the trick is not to say that workers are lazy or that workers are necessarily artistic or motivated. I don't think focusing on the worker is particularly helpful. But what I would say is you can look at it in terms of the nature of the task itself. Okay? Think about it for a second. Some of you have held entry-level jobs. I know I started working, my first job I was probably, can't remember, 8, 9, or 10, washing dishes at my uncle's restaurant. Okay? Well, the task of washing dishes in a restaurant is very much theory X. It's not because as a child that I was dumb, but rather there's not really artistic ways to wash dishes. I mean, I basically had to go out, I'd bust the table, so people leave their dirty dishes on the table, I'd put it in this kind of bin, and then I'd take it back to the dishwashing area, and then I'd stack the dishes in these racks, and then I'd stick it in the industrial-sized dishwasher. I waited, I think it was like a minute or two. When the stuff when the stuff was over, I opened it, I took the dishes out, I put them away, and then I went back out and took on another load of dishes from the tables. There's not a lot of room for flexibility or interpretation there, and furthermore, a manager can manage me very easily because either the dishes are getting washed or they're not. So the nature of the task of washing dishes is like theory X. By the same token, maybe you are a cashier at a grocery store. Well, there's not like creative ways to count change or creative ways to swipe a credit card. Just the nature of the task itself is very much theory X oriented. Has nothing to do with the motivations or intellectual aptitudes of the workers themselves. Now let's look at theory Y. Okay. Theory Y, again, may be appropriate for the more artistic types of jobs. You know, I think about Google, right? A lot of these computer programmers themselves, they may see themselves as artists, but I think the nature of programming also is kind of like being an artist, right? Sometimes you're going to be crazy motivated and you'll get like a week's worth of work done in like an hour. And then there's just going to be some days where you're droopy and you don't have any creative juices and it's just not working. And yeah, you're kind of working on coding, but you're not really going very quickly. And I think that's why Google has such tremendous flexibility for their workers. And they have, you know, you can set up your office any way you want. I mean, I saw a picture of one guy, he'd like dump sand in his office and he had like an umbrella and a lounge chair and he was sitting there. I'm sure it wasn't a real martini, but he had a martini glass and he was sitting there typing and he looked pretty happy, right? Because that probably works really, really well for programmers. It probably doesn't work very well for a dishwasher. Okay? I've worked with some artists before, and they're the same thing. I mean, I don't think it's the most efficient to tell an artist you're going to work an 8 to 5 workday. Many of the artists that I worked with, they don't do much during the day, maybe they even sleep all day, and then they get up at night, and they seem to be more productive in the evenings. That's just what works for them. I even knew one artist, you know, she had the same thing going. It was like, she wouldn't work for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and then all of a sudden she'd go in the studio and work like 24/7 for a week, and to get like the most amazing things done, she'd burn herself out, and then she would recuperate for 3 weeks, and then she'd start the cycle all over again. That happened to, that kind of rhythm worked for her. So it's not because she's inherently creative, but it's maybe the nature of being an artist itself that makes theory Y applicable. Fantastic. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. And as always, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. If you have any comments or questions, post them down below. And of course, for my students, make sure you post a comment down below and sign your name or have a user or a Gmail that is something that I can recognize. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.